second. India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India at home. Lords goes wild.
Hello and welcome to a special episode of the 81 All Out podcast. This is Siddhartha Vaidyanathan, your host. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by someone who I've admired for as long as I have been reading about the game of cricket, a sport that my guest has evocatively called the most subtle and sophisticated game known to humankind. A very, very warm welcome to writer, historian, award-winning author, biographer of Mahatma Gandhi, and a great connoisseur of the game of cricket, Dr. Ramachandra Guha. Thank you so much for sparing the time.
Thank you, Sid.
I must mention one anecdote, Ram. I don't know. I'm pretty sure you may not remember, but of course, it is etched in my memory. Back in the late 90s, I used to be a regular at the Karnataka Quiz Association, where I used to attend quizzes on Sunday. And Ram used to also be there quite often. And he, along with his son, who I have subsequently gotten to know, they used to also be there for the quizzes. And me being an absolutely avid admirer and reader of Ram's columns, once went to him and with a piece of paper and in a very amateur way asked him if he could give me an autograph. And Ram, being Ram, said, "No, I do not give an autograph. I'm not a celebrity. But if you bring me a book of mine, then I'm happy to autograph that." So the very next quiz, basically, I took my favorite book of Ram Guha's that I had read then, which was Spin Another Turns, and he was gracious enough to autograph it. I still have the copy. And yes, I don't know if I've shared this with you, Ram, but this is a very fond memory of mine.
Thank you, Sid. I still follow that policy. I don't give autographs, but I have relented, and occasionally I'm happy to give selfies.
Oh yes! Now, of course, we live in the world.
That is okay, but yes, because I mean, because as a writer of books, you want someone to buy your book and then happily autograph it. Yeah, but anyway, yeah.
Yes. So my couple of friends of mine who are there have often asked me if I've told you this incident, and I said I don't know. But then now that you're on my podcast, I thought it is best if I inform you on that. Anyway, so today we are not going to be talking about Spin Another Turns. Hopefully, I will get to that at some stage. But today we are going to talk about a far weightier book of Ram's, an absolutely authoritative and a sweeping history of Indian cricket that was published in 2002, Corner of a Foreign Field. I'm sure almost everybody who listens to this podcast either has the book or has read the book. And if you haven't, I would highly recommend that you do that. It's a book that, when I read it for the first time, it immediately called to mind the C.L.R. James's classic work of cricket literature, Beyond the Boundary. And this is a social history of the game in India that traces the origins of cricket and illuminates how the game has gained such a mass following from the 1800s through to, the next century until the time the book was published, which was in the late 90s. Through early 2000. Now, I have revisited this book every few years, and with every passing year, it seems that the book has gained greater relevance in understanding the fissures and tensions, both within Indian cricket as well as within Indian society as a whole. Now, these days, of course, it is very common for people to say, sport and politics should not mix, and don't bring politics into sport. But Corner of a Foreign Field is a book that expertly lays out why we cannot understand the development of cricket in India without taking into account the racial, religious, caste-based, and nationalistic threads that are embroidered within the game's fabric. Now, to read the Corner of a Foreign Field is in many ways to have your mind opened up. So I think, Ram, thank you again for this marvelous book. It's been more than 20 years, but I think, given the social and political situation of India today, I think it's a very, very relevant read for anyone. So please take us back a bit to maybe the mid or late 90s when the idea was sort of started forming in your head for this book. And did it all start with, just the idea of history, or did it start with this character who, of course, we shall come to soon, the central character? Let us know.
It actually began as a kind of collaboration between me and Sujit Mukherjee, who was an elder cricket writer I greatly admired. And thank you for your kind words about Spin Another Turn. And how old were you when we met in 97, 98?
I would have been in high school.
Oh, okay. So when I was in high school, I discovered Sujit Mukherjee's writings, and I developed a great admiration for him. And his first two books, Romance of Indian Cricket and Playing for India, which was later updated, had a great impact on me. And to my great pleasure, I befriended him while I was writing my own first two books, Wickets in the East and Spin and Other Turns. And he lived across the road from me in Hoskas in Delhi. And I'll never forget that I showed him a draft of the book, of actually Wickets in the East, my first book, and he made comments. And then I sent him the second draft, and he marked it up in pencil. He was also a university professor and an editor and a publisher, apart from being a cricket writer. He was actually a great literary scholar too, a great expert on to go. And he marked it up, and when I went to meet him, he said, now it is a book. So I remember the endorsement of my second draft. And as I said, this was the mid to late 90s, and Sujit and I thought we would write a book together on the Bombay Pentangular, which would be a book about cricket. It would not be a book about politics or society or culture or race or whatever. It was a kind of it would have been an evocation of the first great generation of Indian cricketers. So Sujit Mukherjee had played Ranji Trophy for Bihar. His captain, Shute Banerjee, had actually played in the quadrangular and the pentangular. So had C.K. Naydu, whom he knew. So that was what it was going to be. And we were working, so we divided up our time, and the microfilms were in the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library of the Bombay Chronicle and the Times of India, the two major newspapers of Bombay. And we did a little bit of work, and then Sujit, after about a week, told me, he said, Ram, I'm too old, my eyesight is not very good, I cannot look at microfilms. So you do it on your own. So he very generously stepped away, and then I continued reading the microfilms. And I think it's hard to date when this book changed from being a history of cricket to a history of India through cricket. But I suspect it was when I was looking at the Bombay Chronicle for the year 1913. And it was about, in those years, this quadrangular was played in September, November, October. Later it became November, December. And I was looking at like early September microfilms of the Bombay Chronicle. And there was a report of a meeting held by the Gaud Saraswat Association of Bombay to felicitate MD Pai, who had just been chosen captain of the Hindu team in the quadrangular. Again, just very briefly, for the listeners who are not familiar with the origins of this tournament, what was to become the Bombay Pentangular started as a match between Europeans and Parsees, the Parsees being the first Indians to take to cricket. A little later, in 1907, it became a triangular with the Hindus added on. In 1912, it became a quadrangular. And from 1912 to 1935, it was played between Europeans, Parsees, Hindus, and Muslims. And in 1935, a fifth team called the Rest was added on to accommodate Indian Christians who could not play for the Europeans, Buddhists, Jews, and so on. And it was really the precursor not just of the Ranji Trophy, but of the Indian Premier League. It was the major sporting spectacle of India between 1912 and 1945. And it was avidly followed. There was radio commentary and all the newspapers. Though it was played in Bombay, the teams were selected from all over India. The Tribune of Lahore, the Amrita Bazar Patrika of Kolkata, the Hindu of Madras would all cover it. So I was reading this report, and it was about the selection of MD Pai as the captain of the Hindu team. And, the Gaud Saraswat, his caste community in Bombay, as it was then known, was delighted that one of their own had been made captain. So they had a party for him. And not dissimilar to, shall we say, I'm sure the Jharkhand Cricket Association would have thrown a party when Dhoni became captain of the Indian team. So this report said that in his speech at the felicitation, MD Pai said he was grateful to his community for hosting this reception for him. But he felt constrained to say that the honor of being the captain should have gone to his colleague, Mr. P. Baloo, who was the senior and the more experienced player in the team. Now, this is 1913. Just 2 years after the first All India tour of England in 1911, a tour that is the subject of a wonderful book by the historian Prashant Kirambi, Cricket Country. Yeah. And on that tour, MD Pai had gone as the batsman and had performed very poorly. I think he averaged 16 or 18. And Baloo was the great success. He was a bowler who got 150 wickets. He was even offered county contracts. And he was clearly the best player in the Hindu team, but he was not made captain. And I knew Balu was a Dalit. And then the kind of penny dropped that Pai was a Brahmin, Balu was a Dalit. Pai was somewhat embarrassed at being made captain. He accepted it, but publicly conveyed his embarrassment in this very euphemistic way. The honor should have gone to Mr. Balu, who was the senior and more experienced player. And then while reading this, I said, this is unprecedented. You would not get K.L. Rahul saying, the honor of being vice captain should go to Mr. R. Ashwin, who's a better and a more experienced player in the team. For example, right? You would not have Pat Cummins saying, maybe Manas Labuschagne should be captain. No person appointed captain ever in public says, I'm not qualified for the job. I don't think it's sporting history. This is a unique occasion. And it had to do with Balu's caste. And then the kind of penny dropped. I said, there's a story here, which goes beyond cricket. And then, of course, I got into the politics of race and religion and so on. And then slowly this became already a social history. And there are some descriptions of matches and innings. But those are secondary to the larger story of the playground as a theatre for the unfolding of the social and political and religious life of British India.
I'm so glad that you brought up Balu straight away, and that getting to know about that incident of his captaincy was a major role in you getting into the book, because clearly for me, he is the hero of the book, Palwankar Baloo, and he is such a remarkable figure because of how much I knew nothing about him before reading this book. I mean, in fact, Spin Another Turns has this one line that you mention about MC Raja, Balu, and Gandhi. And Ambedkar, sorry, not Gandhi, and Ambedkar in that thing. And that itself is like, it sort of opens up a bit in your head and you're like, what? There's this cricketer and this. And then, of course, you have blown that up in corner of a foreign field. And the chapters that you write on Balu and his family are so evocative. And, arguably they are the first family of Indian cricket. I mean, just like you mentioned the Mohammeds of Pakistan and the Chappells of Australia. Absolutely. And how little... I mean, despite them casting such a large shadow over Indian cricket for such a long time, how we know nothing about them apart from this book. And even after that, I don't think there has been other historians who have continued to pursue like a biography of him or anything of that sort.
I wish there was a biography of Balu, a really full-fledged biography which could use more materials in Marathi than I could have used. In fact, the second edition to the book, which was published in 2014, which had one new chapter and a new preface. In that preface, I said, that's one of the sporting projects I would like someone else to do. But, he's a figure that attracts interest. I've had several proposals to buy the rights to my book to make a film about Balu. And I have so far turned them down because they've tried to sensationalize the story. They've tried to Bollywoodize it, And I think... I would not want to be part of that. But it's, I think, a full-fledged biography of this person, his family, the context, against the backdrop of, the social reform movement, Dalit politics. He was a truly great bowler. And his brother Vithal, who's also an important character in the book, who eventually becomes captain of the Hindus. And, of course, scores 100 in an epic final against the Europeans, which I describe with great relish in my book. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, Balu is a central figure. Without pursuing Balu, I would not have even got into the other threads of race and religion and nation. Those came later. And the chapters on Balu are obviously the ones I most enjoyed researching. And I'm very grateful to old newspapers. I mean, you've been a journalist yourself. And I'm glad that the archive of the Bombay Chronicle and of other such papers was preserved in, at least on microfilm form. And one could reconstruct the story of this family, this extraordinary family, mostly through newspapers. There was also a Marathi autobiography that Balu's younger brother Vithal wrote that I got translated. I had a research assistant look at some keen match reports in Navakal, which was a nationalist Marathi newspaper. And there must be much more in Marathi. It was also tracked by the Marathi writer Bal Pandit in a series on great figures of the world, not just great figures of India. So actually in his lifetime, he was a major figure. I mean, in fact, Ambedkar's first public appearance was a felicitation for Baloo in 1911 after he comes back from England, having taken 150 wickets. He was a member of the Bombay municipality. He stood for election to the assembly. So he was a major public figure. And so was Vithal. And Vithal, as a batsman, was an icon for Vijay Merchant. I quote Vijay Merchant on Vithal's batsmanship in my book. And actually, Vijay Merchant, as you know, was a great batsman and also an industrialist and a philanthropist. And he later gave Vithal's children jobs in his mills and so on, obviously out of a sense of obligation. So, absolutely, they were the first family. They were forgotten because their career ended even before the Ranji Trophy, let alone Test cricket. So by the time the 1932 tour of England took place, which is the first time we play a Test match, Vithal was too old. He tried out, but he was in his early or mid-40s, so he really couldn't make it. So he was erased, and so was Baloo. And there's a third brother called Shivaram, who was a capable all-rounder, certainly of a very high first-class level. But as I argue in my book, if one considers Ranji an English cricketer, as he himself said, he said, Duleep and I are English cricketers. And their game was shaped and made in England. They played for Sussex and for England. They never played for any Indian team. If one considers Ranji and Duleep as English cricketers, the first great Indian cricketers were Baloo and his brother Vithal. The first great Indian spin bowler and the first great Indian batsman, respectively. And it's really tragic that they've been lost, to folk and popular memory. And even after my book came out, I wish the BCCI had done something about them. For example, one shouldn't hope for too much from the BCCI when it comes to such things. But absolutely. Baloo is a central figure in the book, and I think without him, this book would not have been written.
The really heartbreaking portions of the book is where Baloo is not even allowed to get into the dressing rooms in his team. And there is also this incident. I think it is Vithal who is not allowed to lift a trophy inside the clubhouse, right? Yeah. And he has to, he has to be presented the trophy outside. And, the kind of, this is, you do mention Jackie Robinson in the book, and this is such a parallel with the Black American experience when it comes to baseball and emancipation. But yes, it is a huge tragedy. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned Vithal and the fact that he was, you write in the book also that how Vijay Merchant admired him. And I was reading, I just noted down that bit where Vijay Merchant writes, and I quote, "With supple wrists, keen vision, perfect judgment of flight and agile footwork, Vithal had mastered the art of batting." Now, you could be talking about Rohit Sharma in this instant. The famed Bombay school of batting perhaps starts with Vithal and not with Merchant.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and same thing with Baloo. Many of your descriptions that you have quoted from those contemporary records. Baloo seems like a Ravindra Jadeja kind of bowler, with that really easy run to the wicket and the accuracy and remarkable. Remarkable how the threads connect across the centuries.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so when you tell us a bit about that incident that you mentioned in the book about traveling to Thane. And you end up meeting this Palwankar Baloo's nephew, who gives you this book, and how it's remarkable how.
So what? Of course, this is pre-internet. It must have been about 1995 or 96, and I looked at all the Palwankars in the Bombay telephone directory, and Perfect. I called them one by one, and one picked up, and I said, "Are you related to Palwankar Baloo?" He said, "Yes." The cricketer, and I spoke to him in Hindi. I don't speak Marathi, but in Mumbai, most Maharashtrians speak Hindi. And I took the train from Mumbai to Thane, which was a kind of evocative journey for a historian, because that's the first railway line in India. Mumbai to Thane, 1853, 26 miles, and 145 years later, I was going down this line, 145 years after inaugurated, and there's these. I remember going to that old part of Thane with, curving streets and old tiled houses. And I met this gentleman, and he said, and then it turned out he was only distantly related to the Palwankar family I wanted, but he gave me the name of Balu's nephew, K.V. Palwankar, was Vithal's son, who stayed in the outhouse of a well-known building in Dadar called Empress Mahal. I mean, if some of your listeners are from Mumbai, they may know Mr. named Dadar TT. And I went there and he chatted and he was very helpful. And then he took out, so this must be 1997. And then he took out this book, his father's autobiography, and said, you can take it. And then I went back and by base part, then I started my research in the book. And the book, I think he must have given it to me in 95 or 96. And in 1998, I published an essay in the Oxford Historical Journal, Past and Present, called Cricket and Colonialism, which had some stuff about Balu and Vithal. And I took that off print on my next visit to Bombay in 1998 and went back to K.V. Palwankar's house, the nephew of Balu and the son of Vithal, and said, sir, thank you for your research. This is what I've written, for your help. This is what I've written. He said, itna chota sa pamphlet, bhag jao, get out. You have exploited me. I know all these journalists, they just cheat and exploit and go away. I said, sir, I fell into the bhago. He called me, hatao yahan se. So I went back. And this was 1998. Then in 2002, my book came out. And the book came out and it got fantastic reviews. It was written about. The Marathi press, covered it. And I may have sent Mr. K.V. Palwankar a copy, I don't know. But then he wrote me a long letter of apology. He said, I trusted you, then I thought I was wrong to trust you, but I'm glad you've done this to bring my father and uncle back to... But I vividly remember how when I wrote just one mere pamphlet, he said, get out, you're a typical exploitative journalist. You've just taken my copyright and done nothing about it, right? So, but when the book came out and the press covered it, because who's going to write about an academic journal, right? So I remember, so he was very helpful and a wonderful man. In fact, he gave me the letter that Vijay Merchant wrote to him after his father died, which I quote in my book. And then in Pune, I met Balu's son, who told me some very interesting things, how that his father discouraged him from playing cricket. So his son, Yashwant Balu Palwankar, captained combined universities and played a few matches for Bombay and then gave up cricket. He said,
and even played a Bombay Ranji Trophy final. Yeah.
Oh, I have to check that. I didn't. Yeah, okay. Yeah. It must be in the 40s sometime.
Yeah, I mean, to have made the Bombay Ranji team at that time and played the final must have been good.
Big deal. But then he said that my father discouraged us from playing cricket because he said, it brings a lot of bitterness and unhappiness and, get a profession instead. So actually, interesting aspect of social mobility. One of Vithal's grandsons was an IIT engineer who is now in Switzerland, and so on. So, the research was interesting, both the kind of field research in the interviews and also, of course, the newspaper documentation.
Yeah, now that you come to that, I mean, there is a quote that you have in the book about saying that the challenges of writing a social history of Indian cricket is the criminal indifference that Indians have to the written record. But as one reads the book, one is also, in a way, marveling at the amount of things that were written about cricket, Times of India, Bombay Chronicle, and the various other publications, the Marathi press, and all that you have ferreted out from in different ways from various libraries. And it strikes me as remarkable that a cricketer such as Vithal, who was so big at that time and who in fact captained the Hindus to such a famous victory in the Pentangular, the book was, just hardly distributed. Nobody seems to have read it. Seems to have been one of the very few copies remaining, which you have, of course, went on to resurrect. But tell me a bit about this paradox here, where you mentioned about the lack of resources, but then you also quote from so many places.
So essentially, sometimes younger scholars ask me whether I do internet research, and they think everything is available on the internet. And sometimes not having stuff readily available is a challenge and a provocation to finding out for yourself and discovering new sources. So I'd say broadly, if I was to look at the major sources I used, one was, of course, old newspaper reports, which is very painstaking and laborious because you have to look at an entire round of the newspaper, scroll it down, and sometimes you don't have to look just at the sports page. There could be editorials. There could be cartoons. There could be letters to an editor, which are often quite interesting about cricket and politics and so on. That was, of course, one major source. A second source was two very valuable collections of older cricket writers. So one was a collection of Anandji Dosa, who was
statistician and writer,
who I think played one Ranji match. He and his great friend Vasant Raiji, who was also very helpful to me while writing this book, who was a cricket historian and a Ranji Trophy player. Anandji Dosa had donated his whole collection to the CCI library. And what they had, Siddharth, was, so Anandji Dosa started in the 30s. I started collecting stuff from then. And I think Vasant Raiji's collection is also the CCI. So they had all the out-of-print books, a biography of C.K. Naydu written in 1945, a brochure of Jardine's team to England in 1932.
Wow.
A club history, 25 years of CCI, 50 years of Sundar Cricket Club for which Vijay Merchant played, histories of teams, Saurashtra cricket down the ages, like pamphlets published on Jubilee's 50th anniversary, which are very rare to get. So that was one collection. The other was in Delhi, and this is a collection of a sports writer called K.V. Gopalaratnam, who used to write a lot in the old sport and pastime of the Hindu, whose son K.V. Prasad is a journalist with the, I think used to be the Hindu, I don't know where he is now. And he had donated his entire collection of clippings and old magazines from the 50s and 60s to the Sports Authority of India. And I'm told that doesn't exist, that the Sports Authority of India has actually, through the criminal indifference to records, given it away as Gandhi. But I was able to see it. So if you have, for example, when Baloo dies in 55, there's an obituary in a magazine and this guy's kept it. So it traces Baloo's career, Or if there's an anniversary of the first England tour, and then again there is something. So those two sets of clippings and brochures and out-of-print books were incredibly valuable. And finally, of course, there was a little bit of interviewing, and one particularly, to me, memorable piece of fieldwork, which emerges very late in the book, long after Baloo and Vithal were dead, which happened in the World Cup of 1999, when India and Pakistan were fighting a war in the high Himalaya and were playing this World Cup match in Manchester, where I actually got a ticket to and was observing the crowd. And that's a kind of, I think that chapter is called Kashmir Comes to the Pennines. Yes. That's correct, the book. So there was a little bit of my own observation, but mostly it was this kind of different kinds of documentary sources, fugitive, scattered, obscure, partly acquired through good luck, partly through the beneficence of earlier collectors like Anandji Dosa and K.V. Gopalaratnam, and of course the fantastic resources of the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, especially old newspapers.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some overseas, a little bit, and some also archival records in Bombay. For example, in the Maharashtra State Archives, I found the records of the setting up of the first gymkhanas on Marine Drive, and how were the Indians able to persuade the British to give them land. In a library in England, I found an out-of-print book published in Bombay in 1897, which was the struggle between European polo players and Indian cricketers, native cricketers. Which
and you didn't find it in the cricket section, but you found it somewhere else.
Somewhere else, yeah. So it's very interesting. So that's that kind of stuff, yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And also, now that we're talking about these sources and these newspapers and these magazines, it also struck me how, completely unabashed these people were, these publications were in talking about the confluence of religion and nationalism and race and caste, and how there were letters being written to the publications saying that this person has been left out because of his caste, how players like Vithal were also boycotted games and said they will not play. This is remarkable in a country where we are now, attuned to saying don't mix sports and politics. Please keep away.
So that is actually remarkable. That incident of where Vithal boycotted, which is again I think a major set piece in my book, and I think it's 1919 quadrangular. 1919 actually MD Pai is captain, and he allows Balu to become captain, he discreetly leaves the field for half an hour and lets him be the acting captain, So, which is a very nice gesture. The next year, 1920, Balu is D.B. Devdar, a young Brahmin, a good cricketer, but a young Brahmin from Pune is made captain. Balu is dropped from the team altogether because the casteist community members of the Hindu Gymkhana did not want to make him captain. And Vithal and Shivaram, Balu's younger brothers, who are still very active, are named in the team, but with Devdar as captain. And they go on strike. And they release a statement, which I quote in the Bombay Chronicle, which says, why should caste discrimination operate on the cricket field? And we won't play. I mean, it's a moment of great courage shown by these people and a sense of self-respect. I mean, it's a challenge to the cricketing establishment, the prejudiced, reactionary cricketing establishment, of the kind, of course, one will never find today by any Indian cricketer, at all, whatever is going on, So, I mean, that's a great episode when Vithal and Shivaram go on strike. They're dropped. And then, of course, 3 years later, Vithal becomes captain and leads his team to victory and continues to captain all through the 1920s. So, yes, I mean, these were people of an extraordinary strength of character. I mean, I think both Balu and Vithal were truly remarkable human beings, not just great cricketers, but their kind of moral fiber, despite the discrimination they'd faced, they were not at all submissive. They stood up for their rights in the way in which, of course, many African-American sportspersons have down the decades.
Yeah, but the interesting bit for me is also, of course, completely agree with you about their courage and moral fiber, but also that the Hindu Gymkhana did not just throw them out and ostracize them. They were actually then discussions about the fact that what can be done in the future to so it was not like a setup where people said, okay, just send them out, we have nothing to do with them, let's just airbrush them out of memory. There was actually a sense of dialogue, and the press was also very involved.
So the press, of course, the nationalist press is very involved, and partly it's because Gandhi has returned from South Africa, and Gandhi is very active in the movement to abolish untouchability. In 1920, the year this incident happens, Gandhi actually says there can be no Swaraj without the abolition of untouchability. So the mood of the Hindu public is changing. It's becoming more open-minded, less crusty and prejudiced. And I think that, of course, aids the cause of the Palwankar brothers.
Yeah, I mean, when did this... So is this a post-independence change, or did it happen over time? Because suddenly, post-1947, it seems that suddenly everyone decided that, okay, sports and politics can just stay apart and we'll just focus on cricket. And even the cricket writers for the last 20, 30 years stay away from it. There is not even an attempt to engage with the society of the day and try and connect it to the sport.
Yeah, I mean, one is, of course, society of the day. I mean, the question of why have there been so few Dalit cricketers, even though the first great Indian cricketers were Dalits, But also, the whole links with politics, with commerce, with big capital, cronyism. None of this has been investigated, and it's a pity. I mean, obviously the issues are different. Some of the issues are different now and new, particularly the role of the market and large corporations in determining how cricket is played and where it is played. And politicians. I mean, it's quite extraordinary how, and this has gone. This has been. It's not just true today. I mean, today, of course, it's rather obvious because the son of the second most powerful man in India is secretary of the BCCI, and the most powerful man in India, Amit Shah, actually is micromanaging how the BCCI is run. I mean, this is a barely kept secret, though no one writes about it. But if you look at Congress politicians in the past, Madhav Rao Scindia and KP Salve, non-Congress, non-BJP politicians like Manohar Joshi, Sharad Pawar, and why is it that these people want to meddle so much in how cricket is played and managed and orchestrated and administered? So I wish, on the historical side, there's been some very good writing. I think Prashant Kidambi's book is first class. I think that's a wonderful account. And there's a younger historian now working on, there's a young historian called Souvik Naha. I don't know if you've seen his book, Siddharth.
Is it about
Calcutta?
Umpiring?
No, it's about Calcutta. It's about the culture of cricket in Calcutta.
Oh, wonderful.
From the 30s, 40s, 50s. Very good book. Cambridge University Press just published it. So it's about the culture of cricket watching and appreciation in Calcutta. I mean, my book is mostly about Bombay. Prashant's book is mostly about England and Indian cricketers in England. And this is a kind of a very good book on Calcutta. And the whole kind of cultural history of cricket in Calcutta, including street cricket, Pada cricket, who goes to Eden Gardens, what are the conversations, what are the debates. Broadly, the 30s to the 60s is what the book is very strong about, but it's excellent. So the social history of cricket is now, some very fine young scholars are working, but bringing it closer to the present and looking at the kind of interpenetration of commerce and politics on one side and cricket on the other in the last 20, 30 years, I think awaits serious analysis and writing. So my own book, actually these 4 master categories that I use to divide the book chronologically: race, caste, religion, and nation. I think by the time I finished the book, and certainly a few years later, I realized that there's a 5th master category, which is the market. And of course the IPL is very much part of it. So I obviously I don't want to add a 5th. I'm not young anymore, and I don't have the energy to do that kind of research. But a whole kind of book on the commerce of cricket, and of course its cultural, political, sporting ramifications, which also, and maybe a 6th axis, sociological axis through which to understand the history of Indian cricket. In addition to race, caste, religion, and nation, there's market and maybe gender. I think that's something which is also missing in my book. Not just women cricketers, but women followers, critics. I mean, that the Indian cricket writer of the younger generation I most admire, Sharda Ugra, is female, and that would have been inconceivable when I was growing up, right? All the number of women who follow cricket, write about it, and crowds are now very mixed. Including at IPL and Test matches, and of course the Indian women's team, and there's a very good history, of course, of women's cricket by Kaushik and Patnaik. But I think some of these aspects, particularly the market as an axis to understand Indian cricket, and economic liberalization, the growth of satellite television, sponsorship, and what that has done to how cricket is played, perceived, viewed, debated about, I think those await their chroniclers.
Absolutely. And I will definitely check out the recommendation that you made about the book about the history of cricket in Calcutta. But just on a personal note, you were looking from the late 90s, you were going back to the early 1900s and seeing all these records. I'm just imagining a historian in, say, 2070 who's going back to the early 2000s and looking at all the media and then looking at the history of the country and drawing a blank in many ways.
Well, it'll be a challenge, but obviously you'll have to use different kinds of sources, websites, social media, videos, and it can be done. It can be done, yeah.
I'm sure. All right. So one of the lines that really strikes out in the book is how you mentioned very early that cricket has always been a microcosm of the fissures and tensions within Indian society, fissures that it has both reflected and played upon, mitigated as well as intensified. Close quote. And I want to talk to you a bit about this really remarkable confluence of the movement for freedom, the nationalistic mood that was there through the time when all these the cricket that you're mentioning, the pentangulars, were going on, and the British role in this whole aspect of cricket as well as cricket within each community, and how some of them seem to have thought that this is a way in which they can keep the nationalistic movement at bay. But some of them also thought that this is a very dangerous thing to be introducing cricket to the Indians, because they could use it as a tool against the British and all these. And especially with C.K. Naydu's famous innings of 153. And just as a note, this is episode number 153 of the 81 All Out podcast. So, it connects very well to some of the famous cricket innings. Yeah. But yeah, how that innings was seen as, a strike against the British Empire, when actually there were many people in Britain. So yeah, talk a bit about that, and especially as a historian and as somebody who has, been a biographer of Gandhi and spoken about independence and spoken about the modern history of history of India. That must have been very interesting for you.
Yeah. So just listening to your question, the way you posed it, Siddhartha, it strikes me that when you start a piece of research, and you dig deeper, and then you start writing, sometimes it takes you directions which you don't anticipate. Just as this became a book about society and politics rather than just about cricket, where it began. But I think I don't know whether it's a happy accident, but one of the things that has emerged is the significance of the city of Bombay in the story of this book. And I'd say that one of the compliments I most cherish with regard to this book comes from Naresh Fernandez, who's the editor of a scroll and a journalist and chronicler of Bombay himself. And he has several times put it on his list of one of the 5 best books about Bombay. So which I mean touched me very much. Not books about cricket, but books about Bombay. So I think, the city of Bombay. So if you look at, firstly, this is a city. Obviously Calcutta is the capital, and later Delhi, but Bombay is the window to the west, in terms of the trade. It's the major commercial center, so the British have a very important strategic and economic stage in Bombay, which is why they want to establish themselves, take over the best lands, construct their clubs, play polo and not allow Indians to play cricket, establish their authority and their dominance over the native population. Then you have, of course, this city built on a tiny string of islands. So unlike our hometown, Bangalore, which is expanded everywhere. I mean, if you see, even in your lifetime, let alone mine, the way Bangalore has gone and north, south, east and west and taken over all the surrounding farmland.
Like an octopus.
Yeah, right. But Bombay can't do that. It has to be shriveled in here. So that these narrow streets and these chawls and, the kind of social segregation between the rich of Colaba, the middle class of Dharavi and the working class of the chawls, the middle class of Dadar, I beg your pardon, and Worli and the chawls of, Dharavi is very, very clear. So, and then you have the national movement, which is also epicentered in Bombay. So Bombay is where Gandhi, launches the Roller Satyagraha of 1919, which is his first major national campaign. It's the place where it's very important in the non-cooperation movement. Not so much in the Salt March, but the 40 to Quit India movement is also played out in Bombay. And that's where Gandhi and Nehru and everyone and Patel and all are arrested. It's where the Mali is raised for the national movement. And it's where the Bombay Chronicle, which is the major English language nationalist newspaper, an alternative to the British establishment Raj-oriented Times of India, and of course the Raj-oriented Statesman in Calcutta, finds birth and finds permanence. So in a sense, this great, complicated, conflict-ridden city of Bombay is the theater against which, the backdrop against which this narrative folds out. And Bombay is where, and Bombay also has a very large Muslim community, and quite prosperous too. And Jinnah is also from Bombay. Jinnah is also a major lawyer in Bombay, right? So the politics of race, caste, religion is played out with a particular intensity in Bombay. So if, shall we say, the quadrangle had been played in Chennai or even in Calcutta, it would have had all this dramatic social and other kinds of interest, or in Delhi. So in a sense, I think when I reflect on it, that it was actually Bombay is also an actor in the book. He speaks in many voices, but he plays a role in the kind of, shall we say, the location, the layout, the social structure, the wealth, and the political dynamics of Bombay are all determining how cricket is played and perceived and how my book gets written. So I didn't want to make Bombay a kind of major player in the book, but that's how it happened. So in a sense, because all these things are going on, it's a city of British wealth and power. It's a city of Indian nationalist assertion. It's a city, and it's also a truly cosmopolitan city. It's absolutely the most cosmopolitan city in India, and I believe probably even the world. I mean, more languages are spoken in Bombay than in New York or in London, for sure, right? And it's got extraordinary religious diversity. Christians, Parsees, also again, the Parsees are so important in taking to cricket, and they're basically in Bombay. So in a sense, I think Bombay is, in some ways, you could even say, I would say the unsung hero of the book, but it is the peculiarities, the uniqueness of Bombay as, India's most interesting and complicated and, of course, most prosperous city that make all of this possible.
Absolutely. And also a city perhaps with such tremendous fissures, because,
yes.
There are times in which you're writing about the riots that are happening, and then 2 days later, matches are happening between Hindus and... I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
And at the same time, you also mentioned the movement, the Khilafat movement about the unity between the Hindus and the Muslims.
And again, Bombay is the center of the Khilafat. Even Ambedkar, Bombay is very important to Ambedkar. That's where he practices law. That's where he starts the Siddharth College. That's where he makes his name as a writer. And of course, then that's where he meets Baloo and fights an election against Baloo. So in all of this, I think the city of Bombay is a very active player in the narrative. And it had just happened. It just happened. And I think I was lucky in the location also.
Beautiful. Now that you say it this way, it takes me back to all the threads that you've drawn. But when you're reading it itself, it doesn't really strike you. Yeah. You're right. But one really interesting point which I read first time in your book is about the contrast between the development of the game in England and the development of the game in India, in terms of how in England it went from being the countryside game and the game of the village to being the city game. But in India, it had originated in the city and then moved on to the countryside. And talk a bit about that. And why do you think it is the case? You have given a bit of an explanation, but I'd love my listeners to understand that as well.
So I think obviously it starts again, Bombay, the Parsees are the most westernized community. So of course there are debates about where was cricket first played in India, and arguably, the first cricket club in Calcutta is older than that in Bombay. The Calcutta Cricket and Football Club is, I think, next to the MCC, the second oldest club in the cricket club. It's older than, the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Their claims were Tellicherry as where the first cricket was played in India in the 18th century. Right. But these were all played by white people. But the Parsees are unquestionably the first Indians to seriously take to cricket. They're also the first Indians to take to, English education, to the law, to Western classical music. They're the most westernized of Indian communities. And in a sense, the story starts with them. And then others kind of then... so hence Bombay, then other communities take it up. Now, so it starts in the cities, and then of course in Calcutta, Madras, and all these have their own version of the quadrangular or the pentangular. There's even a Karachi quadrangular played in the 30s and 40s. In Lahore, you have a three-way tournament and so on. And I think Indian villages were too poor, too divided, too faction-ridden, and also peasant life was too laborious for you to even imagine a Sunday off where you play cricket. Now it may be different. Yeah. But it is impossible. Well, workers got time off. In fact, since it's the 153rd, it's the 153rd episode of your podcast, it's appropriate to recall C.K. Naydu's 153. And among the things I discovered while writing this book was that one of the gifts he got after playing that extraordinary knock was a scooter presented to him to public subscription from the textile workers of Parel. So the textile workers of Parel, it was an extraordinary discovery. So he was a working class hero. It was not an elite game, contrary to what people claim that it's only Tendulkar and the IPL that make it a mass following. The workers of Parel subscribed to get I don't know whether you remember, you know these artifacts, Sid, motor scooter with a sidecar. Have you seen a motor scooter?
Yes. I have.
In my youth, it was very cool if you actually had a sidecar. It was like owning a Bentley or a Mercedes. So
I used to have a classmate who used to come to school in that sidecar, by the way.
It was very cool. And so the workers of Parel decided that the hero needed something special, not just an ordinary motor scooter, but a motor scooter with a sidecar. And they raised enough money to get that for C.K. Naydu. So, fantastic, right? So, I think all this was only possible in the cities. And of course, then later on, the game percolates to the countryside. And I'm not sure. They are, of course, it's still very much in terms of, I think in terms of viewership, now it's penetrated in the countryside with television. I think from the 1980s, people could watch. I don't think, my sense is that in the 1960s and 70s, very few people follow cricket in the villages, not even on the radio. It's really with television that this comes.
No, and even now, those from the villages now move to the cities to play. Like teams in Ranji Trophy teams are filled with players from different parts of the state, but they've all come to the main center to hone their craft. Like people go to Bombay every day, cricketers go to Bombay every day, people come to Bangalore, etc. The other thing that, talking about CK Naydu and the sidecar, there's also this wonderful passage you have about Lala Amarnath, who scores 100 in the first test in India. And then there is this newspaper columnist who says that all these cricketers are going to be ruined by so much of fortune that they're making and the gifts they're giving. And this is exactly what we say about cricketers who make money in the IPL these days, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So even that is not new. The other thing that was interesting for me is that the first great rivalry in Indian cricket was between the Hindus and the Parsees, and not between the Hindus and the Muslims, which of course became a rivalry after time. The Parsees and the Hindus seem to have had such a fierce rivalry for space, for cricket, for supremacy, for proximity to the British, and so on.
Right. Yeah. And also, it's also partly a commercial rivalry because the major merchants of Bombay are either Parsee or Gujarati Hindus. They're basically, and so the sponsors of cricket are also quarreling in the stock, competing in the stock exchange, in the textile market, and trade to China, right? So, and Hindu-Muslim rivalry that comes later is more political and more at the grassroots. It's a product in the 1930s and 40s of the Muslim League Congress conflict and the Jinnah Gandhi conflict, and comes later. So there's first the Parsees and the Hindus, and then is the Hindus. I mean, it's first the Parsees and the Europeans. And again, if you look at one of the discoveries I quote in my book is, I don't know the exact details, but the first time the Parsees beat the Europeans in their annual match. And one of the journalists compares it to some great victory of the Persians in the year 604. Not since then have we great Persians have had such an epic victory kind of thing. Right. So it's Parsees versus Europeans, then Parsees versus Hindus, then of course Hindus versus Muslims, which is the most bitter, most intense, most fractious, and most consequential because it clearly feeds into the movement for Pakistan.
Absolutely. And in terms of the Parsees' contribution to cricket, apart from the great cricketers that they produced and things, they also seem to have been a really thriving and bustling culture of journaling, chronicling, writing books, and regularly diaries and everything. Yeah.
And also broadcasting. I mean, I mentioned that the quadrangular and pentangular was, broadcast live. And it was AFS Talyar Khan, the great Parsee commentator, who did the commentary and became a household name long before the commentators of today because of his commentary. And he was, of course, a Parsee, And absolutely. I mean, the first historians of Indian cricket were Parsee, J.M. Ramji Patel, and, people like that. So absolutely, yeah. The first activist, Chapurji, Saurabhji, who said, we want this ground to play cricket and we can't play on it after the European polo police have gone over it because the turf is not smooth, was a Parsee. So yeah, the Parsee's role in Indian cricket is very, very important. Again, I mean, since this is, cricket lovers listen to this podcast. I mean, it's sort of hardcore cricket nuts, who follow everything minute about the game. It always struck me as interesting and telling and poignant that the last Parsee cricketer to play for India was Farooq Engineer. And in 1972-73, the CCI hosted, the Brahmon Stadium used to host the test matches in Bombay. The last test match hosted in Brahmon was 72-73. CCI was founded by Parsees and Gujaratis, by the way. The Parsees have a strong, and AFS Talyar Khan used to live in the CCI. That's where he died. And in the last match played, a test match played in Brahmon, Farooq
before the long break, it came back after a while.
Farooq got 100. Farooq Engineer got 100. And then the first match played at Wankhede, which was a non-Parsee Maharashtrian Hindu kind of center, right? Farooq played, that was his last test match. And he got 0-0. So it's kind of telling and pointed that as Parsee dominance, including about where cricket was run, which stadium it was played, started declining, you had, as it was towards the end, Farooq Engineer played his last test match at a non-traditional venue in which Parsees had no stake and he got 0 and 0. And just before that, he got 100. Now, it's kind of quite telling and moving. So, yeah, I mean, there was I forget where it was. You follow these things also closely than I said. There was a Parsee left-arm bowler who was recently a net bowler for India.
Nagaswala. Arzan Nagaswala.
From somewhere in Gujarat. And I was hoping, I was hoping maybe he can play for India. Before that, there was a very good fielder who was a passable batsman called Zubin Bharucha, who played for Bombay.
Zubin Bharucha.
Yeah, because I grew up with, Surti and Engineer and Umrigar and all of them. So
Contractor. Yeah.
Contractor. So, but I think now that era has absolutely ended.
Yeah, absolutely. Arzan Nagaswala was a very interesting one. I mean, we should see if I don't know what has happened to him. I should check it out for sure. Yeah, I mean, so we spoke about Balu, we spoke about Vithal, the first family of Indian cricket, but I think we should, and we have touched upon the 153, but I think we should focus a bit on Naydu as well, because
absolutely.
The fact that towering figure that he was, and I did this I had this wonderful conversation with this. Cricket with this professor in Indore, Surya Prakash Chaturvedi. And, he has written some remarkable books in Hindi on cricket. And, he's also personally, he knew Mushtaq Ali and C.K. Naydu much later in his years. And he was talking about how, this Naydu just had to enter the room and he could change the mood. I mean, he was that kind of a towering figure. Yeah. And you also very evocatively write about that in the book. And I think you have quoted many others also, like Talia Khan, who has spoken so well about Naydu.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was a colossal figure. And I think that 153, the best description of that innings is in E.L. Docker's A History of Indian Cricket. He talks about, what it did in the crowd. And of course, he reconstructed stroke by stroke. And the self-respect that it induced among Indians at a time of rising nationalism. I mentioned in my own book that there was a concert in honor of the Indian team in which Hirabai Barodekar sang. And Hirabai Barodekar was actually half Hindu and half Muslim, which is a great classical vocalist to kind of symbolize this rather remarkable but unfortunately fragile and short-lived Hindu-Muslim unity of the early and mid-20s. But he was a colossal figure. He fought with the Maharajas. He was our first captain. He should have been captain 36 too. But of course, through his batsmanship, through his courage, I mean, the stories of his this epic story of a match when he was in his early 60s playing against Bombay, Ranji Trophy match, and a bouncer takes out his two front teeth and he keeps on playing and scores 60. So he was, it's like again I quote in my book about the Jadi's team, the first official test playing team to tour India in 33-34. 33-34. And of course, Naydu was the captain of the 3 test matches, including the first, when Amarnath scored the century you talk about, which was played in the Bombay Gymkhana. And lots of pick-up matches, Central India, Punjab Governors 11. And Naydu was always playing. Naydu played, I think, if memory serves, 12 out of 32 matches against, or 14 out of 32 matches against Jadi's team, because the crowd wanted him. And Jardine said, I'm playing against C.K. Naidu's traveling circus. That's what he said. Partly, yes. But I quote the match, an account of the match in Lahore, Punjab Governors team against MCC. And watching was a young Indian cricketer who later was to play Ranji Trophy and North Zone called Prithvi Raj. And he says, Naidu's 4s and 6s drove the fear of the foreigner from my mind. So this kind of infusion of the nationalist spirit was, and in some ways, the favorite of all my Naydu stories in this book has to do with the photograph. I took great trouble collecting the photographs from different sources for the book. And the photograph of Naydu was given to me by an old family friend, actually an adopted aunt, in whose home I grew up in Dehradun, called Sumati Bagsi, who was a Bhandarkar from Indore and was a close family friend of Naydu. And this photograph is, those who own the book, please have a look at it. The caption is, C.K. Naydu outside the London Zoo, 1930, with 2 indoor friends and the zookeeper. So one of the 2 indoor friends is my aunt's father, Mr. Bhandarkar. So the 2 friends from Indore, C.K. Naydu and the zookeeper. Naydu, then I say, each of them is holding a lion cub in the photo. And I say, C.K. Naydu outside the London Zoo with two indoor friends and the zookeeper. Naydu towers above his colleagues as he towered over other cricketers that he played with or against. One of the indoor men asked whether the lion cubs would bite. And the keeper answered, no, but they might piss on you. Naydu seemed unfazed by either possibility. So I was very pleased because actually this was this photograph which my aunt gave me at the back in Marathi. It was this, her father had written that when we were holding these, the zookeeper said, it won't bite. And Naydu was like just majestically holding this lion cub as if it was his own child. I mean, it's one of my favorite photographs, and I'm glad to have found it in a family collection. So, I mean, a biography. I wish, again, you mentioned these writings in Hindi, I wish someone to write a biography of Naydu, and there must be stuff all over the place. And yeah.
In fact, there was a history of Pakistan cricket that, came out about 10 years ago, written by Peter Obon. And there he mentions this remarkable story about how Fazal Mahmood, who was Pakistan's first great fast bowler, was actually saved from a mob thanks to C.K. Naydu, and how C.K. Naydu stood up for Fazal. And Fazal says that if not for C.K. Naydu, I would have never played Test cricket for Pakistan because I wouldn't have even made it here. And this was when he was traveling by train to go to Pakistan from India. And so, again, I don't know where that sourcing happened, but again, a remarkable sort of, again, moral fiber, fortitude.
And he was 37 when he made his Test debut. What if Test cricket had come 10 years before? I mean, again, like that, Vinu Mankad and Hazare and Merchant lost their six best years to the war. I'd say Naydu, Mankad, Merchant and Hazare were, in terms of their talent, their achievement, and what they meant to Indian cricket and the Indian public at large, easily like Tendulkar and Kumble and Dravid and Dhoni. I mean, for me, they were of that stature, and they really deserve their biographers.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think you spoke about that 153. The last bit I want to mention is there is this famous cartoon that ran in the Times of India or one of the papers the next day, right? Where the clock towers are almost in fear, saying, CK, don't hit us. So,
And Sid, and again, all the listeners, if you think of 1926 and what the bats were like, for him to hit 11 sixes, I think he hit 13 fours and 11 sixes. With today's bats, those would have been 24 sixes.
Absolutely,
just think
absolutely.
Of, what it was like.
Yeah. I mean, that must have been a Sehwagian kind of innings. I can't think of any other batter who could have pulled that off.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And the other thing is that talking about, I brought up this cartoon. Again, reading your book, it is amazing how many people who are not connected to cricket, whether it's playwrights, poets, novelists, and everybody else who was writing about the game. I mean, the Marathi press, you had the poets writing about the game, you had cricketers writing about the game. It seems to have been a much more there seems to have been much more entwined in the cultural fabric compared to now, where, cricket is considered one thing and, art is considered something else.
Yeah. In fact, to follow up on that, again, one of the remarkable strokes of good fortune I had while putting the book together was, I told you about this photograph of C.K. Naydu and the Lion Cub, which my aunt had. But was when I was writing the book, I was talking about it to my friend, the late T.S. Satyan, who was a famous photographer from Mysore. And he said, I have the exact photograph. I have the best possible photograph for your cover, which is a photograph he took in 1952 of R.K. Narayan keeping wickets in a vesting, with his debuts playing. And the original edition has that, right? And it is R.K. Narayan. And of course, R.K. Narayan wrote a charming cricket story in Swami and Friends on the Malgudi Cricket Club. I mean, it's a delightful piece of writing, which I included in my anthology, An Indian Cricket Omnibus. back in 1994. So yes, I mean, Marathi writers. I mean, there was a Marathi writer called N.S. Phadke. Then playwrights. So again, in my book, I use a play written in Marathi by a very celebrated Marathi playwright, R.R. Mama Warekar, which is about the discrimination against the Palwankar brothers, which figures in that play. And fortunately, my colleague Madhav Gadgil translated those relevant passages to him. So, discrimination against Dalits on the cricket field figures in a play by a Marathi playwright in 1923, exactly 100 years ago. No, that's fantastic. That's quite remarkable. Yeah. So, So, Souvik Nahar's book on Calcutta, one of the merits of the book, it uses a lot of Bengali literary writings about cricket. You'll see when you read the book.
Absolutely, yeah. I would love to pick it out. Now, most of our discussions has been, of course, about the pre-independence time and the Baloo and Naydu and all these other things. Now, when you come to the post-independence aspects of the book, you have not focused on any particular cricketer or anything, but you have gone much more in the sort of the essayish kind of mode, where you pick out certain themes and you sort of elaborate on them. Was that partly because you did not want to go into individual series, individual games, and you wanted to have much more of a broader arc? I mean, I just want to understand the reason why you chose to go that path.
So I think one is that I wanted to have a kind of a macro picture. A second is my reader would have been familiar with much of the cricketing action of particularly the 60s and 70s and 80s. And of course, some of it I've written about myself before. But really, there's no point writing about, 1971 or Umrigar or Gavaskar so in that sense, whereas Baloo and Naydu seem to be, Baloo, Vithal and Naydu, and seem to be worth rehabilitating. In fact, now that you mention it, one of the few cricketers in the post-independence period I write about at some length is not an Indian, but a former Indian, Abdul Hafiz Kardar, who played for India before in 46 and in Pakistan afterwards, because his writings are when he brings the first Pakistani tour, and his writings show a certain perception of a kind of a Pakistani perspective on cricket in the subcontinent, kind of a. So I thought I must write about that, and he was also a scholar from Oxford who could write about these things and give it a kind of a ideological patina, which I mentioned in my book. But partly because readers would be familiar with, so they wouldn't be familiar with the broader context. I mean, again, I wanted to write to the extent possible what things like one of the things I was happy to write about when it came to the post-partition, post-independence period were the Commonwealth teams of the late 40s and early 50s, because they had been forgotten. These three Commonwealth teams, in the spirit of Commonwealth transnational solidarity, come here. Teams with Australians, New Zealanders, Keith Miller, Frank Worrell, most of all. Because Frank Worrell never played a test match in India, but he was an absolute hero for Indians of my uncle's generation who had seen him play for Commonwealth teams.
Absolutely. I think even now in Calcutta, they have, when they have the blood donation drives, it's Frank Worrell is remembered because of what he did to Nari Contractor.
Absolutely. It's called Frank Worrell Blood Donation Day. That's what it's called. Absolutely.
Yeah, Frank Worrell, absolute hero. Talking about the, I was just going to take off. Yeah, Abdul Hafiz Kardar. There's a publisher in Pakistan who has actually come out with his put together his diaries and come together. It has come recently. I got the book and it's a folio book. So I will send you the details. It's a wonderful. It's short, but it goes into detail about their victory in England in 1954.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'd love to get it.
Very good.
The detail, I'll order it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I have been meaning to. You mentioned it before, but we should get into a bit of spend a bit of time on that India-Pakistan match in 1999 to be there and to experience that in the backdrop of the war. And you as a historian being in that moment, and also you had been at the 96 quarterfinal in Bangalore, in our hometown. So talk a bit about 99 and your memories of it, and what contrast it a bit with 96 too.
So the first contrast is that Bangalore, as you know, the weather was perfect. And Manchester was bloody cold. I was freezing. I was in the media overspill box. I was able to get a pass. But I was not in the main media box. I was absolutely freezing. Fortunately, I had Suresh Menon next to me for company, so he bombed me and cheered me. He was also, me deservingly and he undeservingly was in the media. Box. But, it was, it's like quite remarkable. Manchester is a city known for football. Occasionally, there have been minor affrays between Manchester City and Manchester United fans. But here there were, I think, 5,000 police brought out because the war in Kargil, India and Pakistan were fighting a war at 13,000, 40,000 feet. And against this backdrop, there was this quarterfinal. And as I said, I was able to get a media pass, albeit in the overspill and not in the main box. But I found it impossible to get a hotel's room, because they were all sold out. And fortunately, a friend who was Jonathan Parry, professor of anthropology in London School of Economics, had a friend who taught anthropology in Manchester called Mary Searle Chatterjee, who had worked on India and was happy to host me for that night. And she was I thank her in my book. And those memories are just vivid of the press really feared a riot. It did not happen. They took precautions. It was a low-scoring match. And some of the best one-day matches are low-scoring. You will agree.
Yes.
You will agree.
Absolutely.
I think India may have got 215, but well below 250. That makes it more interesting. Tendulkar got a good 40, and I remember Robin Singh hitting a six into the stands and the crowd going wild. Robin. Trinidadian. Who I think once captained Brian Lara. I think Brian Lara once played against him for Trinidad under 18.
Juniors, maybe.
Juniors, yeah. So, it was. I remember that it was a bitterly cold day. I was freezing there, and early on, briefly, the sun came out, and you could see the Pennines, and then the sun went down. And the guy next to me said, he saw me looking at the hills, and he said, if you can see the Pennines, if you cannot see the Pennines, it is raining. If you see the Pennines from Old Trafford, it is about to rain. Luckily, it did rain. It was bitterly cold. It did rain. And there were two, I can't remember. So I'll have to consult the scorecard. But I think Tendulkar got about 40. And Syed Anwar, who was one of my absolute favorite players because of his grace and fluency, must have got 40 or 50 on the other side. And you check the scorecard, you may be able to find out. And it was really, the match was decided. And as someone who in cricket always appreciates good fielding above good bowling and good batting, because I was such a lousy fielder myself. What I remember most about that match was, I remember Tendulkar's straight drive and Robin Singh's swat for six and many other things. But what I remember most of all was Venki Syed Anwar, who's taking the match away from India. He bowls a ball which seams away from around the wicket, and it can low on the edge, and Azhar dived in front of first clip and takes a catch, very low, and a fabulous catch. And I remember this is 1999, and about 12 years later, I bumped into Venki, and I said, I remember that catch. I don't remember your bowling that much, but I remember that catch. And he said, yeah, of course, it was, Azharuddin was probably the greatest fielder, all-round fielder ever produced by India. And because particularly, unlike Jadeja, who's never been tested fielding at slip, he was fabulous there too. But I think the overwhelming feeling was of relief that there was no riot. Not so much that India had won, but there was no riot. India then, of course, didn't progress further in the tournament, and Pakistan was humiliated, went to the final, but was humiliated by Shane Warne there. But I think the overwhelming sense was of relief that though India and Pakistan were locked in battle in the Himalaya, here at least there had been no rioting.
But as a historian, as somebody who has studied this very deeply, and as obviously as somebody who has read Orwell, and what is your general take on this, given the situation between the two countries, especially in time of war or in times like this when there is hostility now and it could hostilities anytime? What is your take on playing sport in this kind of environment?
So it's very difficult. Say at one level, the players have enormous respect for one another. Even in the 1996 quarterfinal in Bangalore, one of my abiding memories is of Imran Khan and Sunil Gavaskar walking across the field in the morning. They were both in the commentary box and they were chatting.
Commentary box.
Yeah, and they walked across the field before play started. So the players have a great admiration. I remember even in 1999, when all this happened and there was this Kargil business going on, I happened to meet Raj Singh Dungarpur, the great lover of Indian cricket and administrator who spent his summers in London. And sometime during that trip, I can't remember whether before or after that match, I met Raj Singh. And he told me he attended the reception in Buckingham Palace to all the teams. And he said the Pakistani players only wanted to be near Tendulkar. They wanted to maybe touch his blazer. God is a fly. As close. They were just edging, they were like all whatever, how many teams, 10 or 12 teams participating. And he said the Pakistani players only wanted to be as close to Tendulkar, feel his aura, get his benediction. That was it. And so I think that is certainly there. And but whether what it does to society at large will be polarized, possibly Test cricket is less polarizing, but one can't say for sure. But it's tragic, I mean, I wish I could see Babar Azam back in Bangalore.
Absolutely.
That would be nice.
And we're speaking about 99, the year when Chennai stood up to applaud the famous victory.
He's a beautiful player. I wish I could see Babar Azam back in Bangalore. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that you spoke about the Azhar catch of Saeed Anwar in that match. The interesting thing is just a few months before in Eden Gardens in Calcutta, when Saeed Anwar went on to make 188 odd, Azhar had dropped a catch of Saeed Anwar in the slips. So there was a bit of a redemption there for Azhar saying, okay, I got to the World Cup. Yeah. This is wonderful, Ram. I've covered quite a bit of it to the book. I mean, you spoke about Raj Singh Dungarpur, such a great loss that he's not with us anymore, and also such a great loss that he didn't really document his memories of cricket and chronicle that. But Raj Singh is probably when you just said CK Naydu to Raj Singh, he could go for like 3 hours non-stop. The kind of admiration he had for the man. Was just
I wish his stories had been recorded. I wish some Bombay journalist had sat down with him 1 hour a day for 2 months. You'd have had a book. It's tragic. I mean, his stories were just extraordinary. But I don't know whether I quoted in this book or elsewhere. But I talked about Vithal. He asked me, because he used to hang around CCI, and that's when I was doing my research. And occasionally I would bump into him, and we would chat about my research. And I told him once about Vithal. And he said, oh, Vithal. I said, I've been finding this stuff about Vithal and his brother. And he said something very interesting. He said, my father told me Vithal was as good as Hazare.
Oh.
He said, my father told me Vithal was as good as Hazare. And I remember writing about this, I don't think in column of Foreign Field, maybe in a column, where I said, Raj Singh told me, or maybe even in column of Foreign Field, I can't remember that. Raj Singh's father said Vithal was as good as Hazare. Raj Singh would have certainly said Hazare was as good as Gavaskar. I will say Gavaskar was as good as Tendulkar, which means Vithal is as good as Tendulkar. Because Raj Singh said this. He just spontaneously said this. He said, my father told me Vithal was as good as Hazare. Now, that's something that's huge praise, right? Yeah.
Huge. Yeah, I mean, and we can even extend it by saying his father might have shaken Vithal's hand, and you have shaken Raj Singh's hand, and Tendulkar has probably shook your hand, so the connection is formed.
Yeah.
Wonderful. As I said, we have covered some of the themes in the book, but please pick it up. It's a very sort of immersive read. You will get lost in it. It will take you across, so many rabbit holes. You will understand. You will try and do your own research in certain parts. It's beautiful. I cannot recommend it highly enough. Ram, before you go, we ask many of our guests this, and I cannot not ask you this, being a historian. We ask to recommend 3 or 4 or 5, how many ever cricket books for our listeners. Many of our listeners are very avid readers, and I'm sure they would love to hear some of the books. It need not be it's not like you're saying they are the best books, but it's just something that you would recommend readers to read. So, yeah.
In 2000, I edited an anthology called the Picador Book of Cricket. And I ended that book with 50 of my favorite books on cricket. There's an epilogue. The anthology is other people's writings, not mine, but there's an epilogue written in my own voice in the form of an essay called An Addict's Archive. And it's about 50 books that I keep on returning to. And at that stage, Gideon Haigh is included in the anthology as the author of an article on cricket. But in 2000, he had not really become a famous cricket writer, so he was not in my list of 50. Today, if I was asked to list 10 books on cricket, just 10, not 50, the most difficult choice before would be, which book of Gideon should I have?
Yes, absolutely.
Should it be his Iverson biography? Should it be book on Vaughan? Should it be the Summer Game? Should it be the Big Ship? What should it be? Right. So I think, of course, I don't want to make it only a list about Gideon, but in some ways, his book, A Stroke of Genius, which is about this photograph that D.W. Belden took about Trumper, and it's a history of cricket and a history of cricket's photography. I won't say it's it's hard to say which is Gideon's best book, but it's the one that is most transgressive, most innovative, most original. So I'd say certainly do that, and that may take you to Gideon on Vaughan and Gideon on Iverson. Good. So start with something by Gideon, because 23 years ago when I compiled a list, Gideon was not even there. Right? He is the greatest cricket writer of all time, period. There can be no dispute about that. Just as Beyond the Boundary is the greatest cricket book of all time, there can be no discussion of that too. Right. Then I would certainly include 2 books by Indians. One is Prashant Kidambi's Cricket Country, which I've talked about. The other is Rahul Bhattacharya's Pandits from Pakistan, which is a very fine and moving and very charmingly written travel diary of India-Pakistan relations. And we've talked about India-Pakistan relations in our conversation. Then I think Shield Berry's book on, I think it's called The Spirit of Cricket, which is a first-rate kind of overall history of the game. There's a very good book on West Indies cricket by Simon Lister, whose name is it called the Fire Next? I forget.
Fire in Babylon.
Fire in Babylon. So I think these are some of the really fine books I've read recently that have emerged. But West Indies cricket means so much to me because I grew up and West Indies was, the great power. And, Gary Sovers, what Gary Sovers meant, of course. Yeah, so I recently read quite a good book by Vic Marks called Late Cuts. I would recommend that. It's a very... And I have a theory about books by cricket writers that, you can't expect Sachin Tendulkar to write a good book. Or even, Ricky Ponting or Wasim Akram. I've not read Sultan of Swing. But if you're a reasonably good cricketer like Vic Marks, Vic Marks has had the experience of Graham Hick taking 400 runs off him and his team in a day. So if someone has hit 60 sixes off you can write about cricket. You don't have to learn to fail. So Vic Marks' book on Late Cuts is one of the better books written recently by a cricketer. And it's written by him. It's not written by a ghost. So I would include that certainly. So these kind of 5 or 6 books. And of course, Gideon, his book on Vaughan is special. And I tell a story about his book on Vaughan. That it's a tiny book with a very clever title, On Vaughan, or After On War by Clausewitz, the great manual of military strategy. And it's cutting out 4 substantive chapters, and that's it. And I bought it in Delhi. I was flying to Shanghai, from Delhi to Shanghai, to give a talk. And I got on a flight at 10 o'clock. The seat next to me was empty. And I read the first 2 chapters, was gripped by it, but it was about 12:30. I was very tired. It was midnight. I put it in the empty seat, went to sleep, got up an hour later, and someone had flicked the book. So I said, it's a book even a Chinese wanted to flick, on a flight from Delhi to Shanghai. So I had to come back from China and then buy another copy and read the next 2 chapters. But I told Gideon, this is a great tribute to your book. It was, if it was stolen on a Delhi Bangalore flight or a Sydney Melbourne flight, it's fine. But a Delhi Shanghai flight, in which I was certainly the only Indian. Your book was stolen from me. So,
It's great. It's great to know that people are stealing cricket books. I mean, there can be nothing more reassuring than that, especially for somebody who is trying to republish old cricket classics. This is the ultimate proof that I'm on the right path.
Correct. Yeah.
Yes, and of course, Gideon. Personally, my favorite book of Gideon is Cricket War, about the Packer years that he has sort of atmospherically recreated.
Yeah.
So yeah, of course, anything but Gideon, fantastic. So thank you so much, Ram. This has been a pleasure. You've spared so much time, and you've spoken about a book that is very close to my heart, and I'm sure all my listeners would have enjoyed this. And also, if you haven't read the book, please pick it up. Please read it. And it's a treat. It's something that you have to have on your shelf, like all of Ram's books, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks so much. Thanks.
Thank you. And a regular reminder to our listeners that you can follow us at 81 All Out on Twitter. Our website is 81allout.com. And thank you so much for all the support. And as I mentioned, we have been republishing some cricket classics. I will put the link in the show notes. Cricket Beyond the Bazaar by Mike Coward is our latest. And then before that, we published Mike Marquis's War Minus the Shooting. So please pick them up. And thank you for listening, and see you soon.
India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India at home. Lords goes wild.